It's possible to artificially strengthen the range of one player so that he appears to be multiple players. This can be done with the use of a delete action. To demonstrate this, first let's have a look at this tree where we are under the gun and we want to figure out an open shoving range versus the 9 other players. We assume that all other players will have the same identical calling range of kings plus and ace king. Now if you enter this tree versus 9 players, you'll soon notice that the tree quickly explodes in size, due to the many possible combinations of players calling and folding. Because of this, I've created a simplified setup of this situation in this file. It assumes that if one player has a starting hand in the calling range, all remaining players behind him will fold, regardless of their hand. And if the player does not have a starting hand in the range, he folds and we move on to the next player. So there will be at most one player who calls the shove. Even with this simplification, the tree is already very large. However, this exact tree can also be created in a much more simple way. On top of that, the simplified tree will also be heads up, which will allow the math engine to work. Let me just load the simplified version of this tree. And here we are. This tree does exactly the same thing as the previous one. Here's how it works. The calling range for big blind is the same one as all the other 9 players had previously. And the last action folds the remaining hands. Between those actions, a delete action has been placed that deletes all the hands that are not in the calling range. And it does this with a frequency of 90%. Now why is this the same thing as the previous tree? To see this, let's just remove the delete action for a second. And compute. So here, villain is folding 98% of the time. Let's now do some math. Now if the chance of one player folding is 98% of the time, then the chance of 9 players folding is 98% to the power of 9, equals approximately 83%. Let me put back the delete action now. And let's have a look at its influence by computing. And there we are. Its function is to reduce the relative frequency of the folding hands by deleting 90% of them. And with this 90% weight for deleting the folding hands, the chance of big blind now holding a calling hand increases to about 17%. And the chance of him holding a folding hand has dropped to about 83%. So it's now as if big blind, all by himself, is now the 9 players from the previous hand. Now as for how to get the 90% weight here, it's possible to calculate this number, however I found it by experimentation, by just right-clicking the delete action's condition to edit its weight. I'll make it 50%. Computing. And just trying different weights until the folding frequency had become 83%. And apparently that happens at a weight of 90%. As for under the gun's expected value for shoving in this tree versus the artificially strengthened big blind, this EV in this tree is -$1.68. Let's now compare this result with the one in the bigger, more complicated tree. I'll just load it again and compute. And in this elaborate tree, the shove has an expected value of -$1.71. So using the delete action appears to be a pretty good approximation. Now of course, this trick does not include the possibility of multiple players calling the shove, instead of the maximum of just one. But still, if you want a quick impression of playing versus multiple players, while actually using only one player with an artificially strengthened range, this delete trick goes a long way.